Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Legacy of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 30, which is called Choosing Sides. So, pretty short chapter. This is a direct follow-up to the previous, Kavik and Kalyan chapter. So obviously the weapons are out, the bending is about to happen, non-benders have their weapons out, it's about to be a bloodbath. And of course, Kalyan is trying to protect Kavik in all of this, showing, that kind of weakness of his character, but, he was a bit taken by surprise that the Order of the White Lotus showed up like this, as was Kavik. But that's kind of what happens here. So as Kalyan is trying to get Kavik out, as we start the chapter here, Kavik immediately is like, I'm not a super fan of either side here, but ultimately, my team is the White Lotus here. Like, he cares much more about them than he does about the head kickers, of course. Like he has a side here, even if, like, his ultimate allegiance is kind of in the end to Yangchen. So he decides to help out the White Lotus in whatever way he can. One of the waterbenders on Tails' team has a water pouch, and before he jumps into battle, Kavik starts kind of manipulating that. He's trying to just get it to burst so this guy doesn't really have water or has to like gather it really carefully. And all this is happening like while Kalyan is trying to tackle Kavik to the ground, like, what are you doing? And he manages to basically restrain the guy because, of course, the way waterbenders typically wear water pouches, like, it's a full kind of like equipment thing. And he's like manipulating his hands like all over the place because like it's just this big thing of water that's not bursting. So he's kind of almost like wrestling him without just with waterbending this pouch. Eventually, what he manages to do is, what does it say here? Kavik constricted the loop of water with all his might, compressing the association man's neck against his own shoulder, blocking the blood flow to his head. So it's just this crazy situation where, like, just water bending the pouch effectively, he manages to force this guy into this position where he, like, kind of knocks him out. So the association is down a member going into the fight here. At this point, Kalyan does manage to fully take control of Kavik here and kind of basically takes him off. But what's interesting here is we get this moment here. 3 sharp knuckle jabs laced their way up Kavik's spine, and suddenly the world slowed. So knuckle jabs you definitely associate with chi blocking, so that seems to suggest that, like, okay, Kalyan, like, whatever chi blocking investigation training they did, Kalyan seems to have incorporated that into his thing. Now obviously in this case it's more of a like, oh wow, like right into the back of the spine here. This is more of a chi blocking to fully like knock someone out, I guess, because you did such a like an important kind of sections here rather than just like blocking bending here. But to me, the second you see knuckle jab, I think you have to associate it with chi blocking. So straight away, like, that is quite interesting that, like, okay, I assume Kalyan didn't go through the crazy levels of training maybe that some of the others went through, but it's just interesting that it seems like he has that skill and learned it at some point along the way. It's just like randomly included here and not really referenced again, but like, okay, Kalyan had some level of chi blocking or something like that is kind of interesting. But yeah, Kalyan tries to kind of guide him away, and as they're going through, like, the battle obviously is happening around them, like people are dying around them, because like the way they described it there, everyone was getting ready to kill. There were fire daggers out, like sharp icicle blades coming out, earthbenders were getting sharp bits of stone out. People were going for the kill here, and that's what the way to describe it, that like Kavik and Kalyan nearly get hit with like a dart, a little arrow, and then as they're moving along, Kalyan like water whips it into one of the Order of the White Lotus members' leg, and this woman, like, keels over basically because the tip had been poisoned. It's a kind of crazy situation, and because a lot of the association members don't really know what way to view Kavik, and Kalyan, I suppose, hasn't been able to fully like communicate with them all what's going on. It's this crazy, like, chaotic situation that's happening here. They like go past people, like, what happens? Yeah, there's a description here. He heard bodies come together in tight embraces, the ensuing grunts and coughs, the strain and muffled cracks of bone breaking, the wet squelch of sharpness cleaving flesh. A man collapsed like a fallen log across their path, his life spilling from his neck. So they're really playing up the idea here is that when benders really go at it with the intent to kill, it is a brutal kind of bloodbath that actually happens here. Just a mention of bones breaking and a lot of cleaving going on. But anyway, what happens here is then we get to see sort of what's happening here. And so Do and Tail end up facing off against each other, and they're really up close. So obviously that is going to typically favor the non-bender, and that's exactly what happens here. It just describes it as a quick exchange of feints led to a single trapped limb, and then it was over without a proper start. Do slumped to his knees, his face white, his lips pressed together in a grimace. Tail kept the knife embedded in his chest like a handle, and quickly clamped his other hand over Do's mouth and nose to suffocate him faster. And Do's dead here, because they just describe it here. Do's final act here, he locks eyes with Kavik and basically dies, but one final move, like fire bending, like 2 fingers, and a small kind of like beam of fire just kind of like grazes Kalyan, enough to kind of allow Kavik to get away. And so we get this kind of moment where like Do kind of proves himself. You've kind of disliked this character in a lot of the scenes he's been in. He's like the opposite of Kavik as a somewhat lower down recruit of the White Lotus. Do has been the one who completely believes in everything the White Lotus does, whereas Kavik is very suspicious of them. He doesn't particularly like their approach, but Do has given another member of the White Lotus a chance to get away here, and that's what he does. So Kavik flees. He is pursued actually first of all by Tail. So there's a big encounter here, like he slams him up against the wall, and we reference what happened before, which was like I think Kavik like spit on Do on Tail in the previous chapter, and so we get that again here of like Tail has his knife up against Kavik's throat and it's just like, spit on me now basically, will you? And Kavik's like, well, if you're going to be a slow learner about it. And so this is Kavik doing a really kind of clever, delicate maneuver that I have to assume he learned to a certain extent from the Order of the White Lotus. So it says here, Kavik blew out the only source of water he had, the saliva in his mouth, focusing the moisture into tiny needles of ice with his lips. The shards sprayed across Tail's eyes. And Tail is usually like, pretty composed even when he's getting slightly injured. But like he recoils back kind of screaming because they don't really come back to him. But I think the idea is like Kavik has basically like blinded him here. Now it's hard to maybe get a full grasp for like, how devastating this move was. Like how tiny are these needles? Is this just the idea of any pain to the eyes has caused this, or like has this actually been like, Tail can't see anymore type thing? But like he's kind of out of the fight at this point, like dealing with that. So Kavik feels like he's away now. He's managed to get away from Kalyan and from Tail, and he's trying to just find like, okay, wow, I somehow managed to get out of that kind of crazy situation. And right as he's going through a section he thinks is clear, he suddenly kind of almost starts falling, and he's like, what happened? And it's like, felt like getting punched. And it says here that the person who'd been waiting in the recession sank his knife into Kavik's exposed flank. And so he's got this like knife wound in the side now, and we get the reveal here. I told you exactly what I would do if I caught you betraying the Avatar, Jujinta muttered in his ear, and Jujinta just walks off. And it's like, whoa, what happened here? And obviously there's 2 approaches to this chapter, because as presented, without bringing in the kind of knowledge of the kind of twist in a way on this in future chapters, the idea that you're meant to take away from this is that the plan that the team came up with was we will burn Kalyan and hope that goes our way. Now that has gone very wrong with the White Lotus, and I guess from Jujinta's perspective, he sees Kavik fleeing from what he was maybe meant to do, and has decided that this is his time to exact his quote-unquote revenge for Kavik betraying the Avatar. Because it looks like he's basically fleeing, and that seems to be the idea that has Jujinta. It seems like things have maybe been getting a little bit better, but ultimately these two, their issues have been a bit unresolved. has Jujinta kind of done this without consulting anyone? Whereas, of course, because of what happens in chapters after this is actually just kind of part of the plan. This is Jujinta doing the strong acting kind of role of, like, if anyone had overheard them here, he had to play this role nicely, and that actually this is a clever, calculated knife wound that is maybe not as bad as is actually made out to be here. Whereas this feels like this is a he will bleed out eventually type thing. This is actually much more carefully planned than that, to, in a way, lead Kalyan astray, because there's a second stage to the plan of how they were actually approaching to do it with to deal with Kalyan. So it is an interesting one. The whole, oh, what has Jujinta done? It's a bit weird, of course, because, again, it's the book relying on you feeling like a little bit off kilter because of the way the book is presenting the information. Whereas, like, Jujinta had given Yangchen a letter a couple of chapters ago, but now here he is stabbing Kavik, and if you're not paying attention, you're like, wait, what scene has happened before? What? Again, it's not complicated to follow, but, like, is it super clear? Did they need to do it in this way? The reveal is interesting, when it happens, but I think it's relatively obvious that, like, some sort of a plan is happening here. Because to me, the takeaway here is definitely that Kavik is doing the right thing and he's working effectively with the team. At the very least, he has consulted kind of Yangchen about that. I think that's the impression that you sort of get. It's just that they skipped from kind of Kavik making a decision up in his own mind to the scenes actually happening where the action takes place. Whereas we're going to eventually come back to the how did they actually plan this? It's just the question of, like, do we know at this section that there is actually kind of like a plan in place or not? That's the complexity of kind of what's going on here. But overall, I think it's a pretty good chapter. The violence of the bending, it was cool to see, given that it's just this vicious fight between two groups in the streets. Do gets a kind of cool moment as he kind of dies, showing his loyalty to all members of the group, including Kavik at the end. Kavik gets his moment to kind of counter Tail, in a way, getting a little bit of revenge for Do, and then the Jujinta kind of thing is like, well, what's going on? And it works quite nicely in overall what's attempting to go on here. But I think that's basically all there is to say about this chapter. Interesting stuff, but what are your thoughts in the comments below? Otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.